Hey everyone, and welcome back to Old History Stories. You know I love digging up those forgotten legends and the truth hidden just beneath the surface of the past. Today, we are diving into a fictional untold history, a story that exists in the shadows of American history, a tale of ambition and survival that never made it into the official textbooks. We're going to explore how one man, a former European scholar, tried to carve out a perfect, secret state in the brutal wilderness, changing his very soul to meet the demands of nation building. This is not the history of the Founding Fathers. This is the story of the forest engineer who tried to cheat destiny. So, if you love tales of political intrigue, philosophical betrayal, and the harsh realities of the early American frontier, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and definitely ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single installment of The Architect of Aeros. Alright, let's stop talking history and start living it. Let's jump into Chapter 1, The Vow of the Wilds. The Forest Engineer, The Architect of Aeros. Chapter 1, The Vow of the Wilds. The spring of 1703 was relentless in its humidity and harshness. In the deep, unforgiving forests of the New World, where the ancient trees stood like silent, towering judges, Elias Carson staked his life on the most demanding gamble. At 45, with thinning hair and eyes that held the hard residue of old European disappointments, he carried within him the blueprint for a perfect society. Elias was no common settler. He had been a brilliant, celebrated scholar at Oxford, steeped in Greek philosophy and the political theory of emerging nation-states. Yet the corruption of the crown, the rigid arrogance of the church, and the insatiable greed of man had driven him to despair. He had concluded that reforming existing systems was futile. True change required a blank slate. He needed a place where he could craft a state character from scratch, adapting his own morality to the needs of the state rather than the ideals of man. His destination was the thick, unexplored ridges between what would eventually become the Carolinas and Virginia. He was accompanied by 50 loyal adherents, exiled philosophers, ambitious but failed merchants, and stern laborers who believed in the primacy of hard work over divine right. Their goal was to establish Aeros, a secret, idealized colony hidden deep within the Appalachian folds. The first shift, scholar to engineer. The immediate grinding challenge was not political theory, but simple survival. The wisdom gleaned from dusty European tomes was useless here. Elias, who had spent decades debating the nature of democracy and the virtue of kings, now had to embody the skills of a carpenter, a hunter, and a farmer. His meticulous, ink-stained hands learned to grip an axe. This necessity forced his first brutal shift in character. The flowing robes of the theorist scholar were discarded for the mud-stained coat of the pragmatic engineer. "We did not come here to host philosophical debates," he declared one evening, his voice sharp against the crackling fire. "We came to survive. Nature will not yield a single law book, only soil. And if we wish to govern this soil, we must become as hard and sharp as the tools we use." The site for Aeros was chosen for its strategic isolation, which was a natural defense. But this isolation brought the extreme test of self-sufficiency. As the first bitter winter approached and food stores began to dwindle, Elias faced his first test of governance. When a small group of settlers, driven by fear and hunger, attempted to hoard essential rations, the old Elias might have sought reconciliation and understanding. The engineer Elias did not hesitate. The culprits were publicly and severely punished, not merely for the crime of theft, but for the crime of undermining the community's trust in its own structure. This act of cold discipline sent shivers through the camp. He had consciously sacrificed personal compassion for the longevity of the collective. The Charter of the Wilds. Before the first year was out, Elias formalized his initial laws, which he called the Charter of the Wilds. This was not a document focused on the rights of the individual, but a document based entirely on duty. The charter rested on three unforgiving pillars: primacy of labor. Every able-bodied citizen must contribute a calculated minimum of work. Laziness was equated with treason. Preservation of knowledge. In an homage to his former life, education and the small salvaged library were deemed mandatory and sacrosanct. Control, not freedom. All executive power remained centralized within Elias and his small hand-picked council. Stability, he reasoned. Chapter 2. The Woven Net of Power. The silence of the mountains was the currency of Aeros, but Elias Carson knew that silence was the hardest thing to buy. The rumor of disease, a quick, ugly lie Elias had woven to deter the local indigenous scouts, served its immediate purpose, securing the perimeter. But as the fear of famine gave way to the need for resources, Elias understood that stability built on sheer fear was fragile. He needed a system that internalized his control, one that felt like protection, not tyranny. He needed to transition fully from the engineer to the diplomatic controller. The Warden Corps, ears and eyes. Elias's first act was the formal establishment of the Warden Corps. It was presented to the community as an official volunteer militia responsible for border security and organizing the shared harvest. In truth, it was Aeros's internal intelligence network. Elias hand-picked 5 individuals, loyal, pragmatic, and indebted to him from the voyage over, and tasked them with monitoring the settlement. "I do not ask you to spy, gentlemen," Elias told them in the newly constructed council hall, a room that was utilitarian but boasted a large, meticulously drawn map of the surrounding terrain. "I ask you to listen. I ask you to report where the weaknesses lie in the people's faith. Are they hungry? Are they tired? Do they question the Charter of the Wilds? Bring me these vulnerabilities so I may mend them before they become fissures in the state's foundation." His old friend and most idealistic student, Thomas, was the first to openly challenge this new structure. "Elias, this is a betrayal of the very principles we fled Europe for," Thomas argued, his voice hushed, but raw with genuine indignation. "A secret police structure in the guise of a militia? You are creating the very tyranny you sought to escape." Elias leaned back, his eyes cool and steady. "Thomas, you confuse ideals with existence. Europe possessed ideals, and look how quickly they shattered beneath the weight of incompetent men. Aeros exists in the wilderness, surrounded by wolves. The Warden Corps is not meant to curb freedom, but to guarantee survival. If I allow dissent to fester, it will rot the foundations of this state. My character, Thomas, must adapt to the necessity of the state. If necessity demands a controller, then I shall control." Thomas, unable to reconcile his friend's pragmatic cruelty with his former brilliance, eventually accepted a minor role as the community's chronicler, a position Elias shrewdly allowed, knowing Thomas's idealism, if publicly recorded, would serve as a powerful moral justification for Aeros to future generations, even if it contradicted the brutal current reality. The blind path, trading in the shadows. Survival also demanded external resources: iron, salt, gunpowder, essentials Aeros could not produce enough of. Elias needed to trade,
but revealing the location of Aeros was an existential risk. He devised the blind path. He selected 3 of his most morally flexible settlers, agents he christened the couriers. Their mission was to traverse the harsh mountain terrain to a predefined remote location near a documented colonial frontier outpost, perhaps a small, rough trading village near the Great Wagon Road, a route frequently used by other settlers pushing west. The couriers were strictly forbidden from carrying any identifying marks, maps, or letters pertaining to Aeros. They were given a precise, coded protocol for meeting a prearranged contact, a fictional figure named Silas, who would exchange their goods for the vital supplies. "You will be paid in full for your risk," Elias instructed the couriers. "But understand this: if you deviate from the path, if you reveal the name of our home, or if you bring any unwanted eyes back to these mountains, the consequences will not be against you alone. Your families, all of Aeros, will pay the price. Your loyalty is not to me, but to the continued silence of this valley." This calculated, cold threat worked. The couriers knew that Elias, the state builder, possessed the ruthlessness to follow through. The first trade run was successful, bringing back much-needed metal tools and a small stock of salt. The success was not just material, it solidified Elias's new persona. He had successfully managed external risk through calculated deception and internal loyalty through carefully managed fear. He was now a master of the double-sided coin, one side showing the idealistic engineer, the other the ruthless controller. The shadow of Europe returned. The stability was short-lived. A few weeks after the courier's return, a scouting party from the Warden Corps brought back disturbing news. While patrolling the outermost boundary, miles from the actual settlement, they had encountered 2 individuals. One was a hardened British frontiersman, the other a man dressed in the worn academic robes of a European scholar. The scholar was asking pointed questions, not about minerals or land rights, but about an old acquaintance, a former professor who disappeared mysteriously from Oxford a few years ago. He had papers and asked for a name, Carson, sir. He seemed to be an agent of some sort, looking for a debtor or a runaway, the warden reported breathlessly. Elias's face, usually impassive, tightened. He had expected the wilderness, the indigenous people.
Chapter 3: The Architect's Edge. The news delivered by the Warden Corps hit Elias Carson with the force of a battering ram. Europe had followed him. The scholarly agent asking after the disappeared professor was proof that his escape was not final, and his secret state was vulnerable. Elias knew the diplomatic controller persona, the one built on strategy and managed deception, was insufficient for this threat. An official Crown inquiry would not be deterred by rumors of disease or small-scale trading. The threat was not just exposure. It was the annihilation of his philosophical project. To survive, Elias had to become the architect, the final unforgiving designer of the state, willing to remove any obstacle, no matter the human cost. The final blueprint. Elias gathered his inner council, his loyal warden leader, a pragmatic former military quartermaster, and surprisingly, Thomas, the chronicler. Thomas was necessary because Elias understood that the darkest acts must be justified by the highest ideals. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice devoid of emotion, "the wilderness tests our body. Europe now tests our will. The agent asking for Professor Carson will bring formal searches, royal charters, and colonial troops. We cannot fight them. We must vanish the threat before it finds the trace." The debate was swift and sharp.
The quartermaster argued for a violent ambush. Thomas recoiled. "We have established Aeros to be better, not to murder a man for asking questions." Elias dismissed him with a cutting look. "A better state is one that endures, Thomas. This is not about murder. This is about sovereignty. If this agent finds us, Aeros will be absorbed, our charter dissolved, and our people forced into servitude to a king we reject. We must eliminate the link between Professor Carson and this valley." His plan was not a brute attack, but a calculated architectural collapse of the agent's mission. The key lay with the couriers, the only link between Aeros and the outside world. The calculated sacrifice. The couriers, led by a man named Alistair, were ordered to return to the remote trading post and establish contact with the British scholar, posing as local trappers who had recently shared a campfire with the professor days before his disappearance years ago. Their instructions were chillingly specific. Confirm the agent's intentions. Establish that the agent sought only information about a person, not a place. Provide a false trail. Alistair was to recall that the professor was deeply disillusioned and had spoken of escaping north toward French Canada, seeking a mythical isolated religious community. This would draw the official search far away from the Appalachian region. The ultimate silence. Once the false trail was set, Alistair was to ensure the information could never be retracted. The couriers, driven by a mixture of loyalty and fear, succeeded in setting the false trail. The British agent, satisfied that his quarry had likely vanished into the vast Canadian wilderness, prepared to depart. But the final part of Elias's blueprint required the destruction of the couriers themselves. They knew too much. They knew the trading routes, the protocols, and, most fatally, the general area of Aeros. The architect could not allow even 3 loyal men to hold the map to his state's destruction. As the couriers returned through the mountain pass, they were ambushed by a second silent patrol of wardens who had been positioned there for weeks. The operation was swift and brutal. The couriers were eliminated, and their bodies were left in a remote location staged to look like a conflict with hostile indigenous tribes, a common tragedy on the frontier, justifying the necessary evil. When the news of the couriers' fate reached Aeros, the community mourned. Thomas was devastated, writing furiously in his journal about the tragedy of the unforgiving mountains. Only Elias, standing on the perimeter, understood the truth. He had just murdered the past to secure the future. He addressed the council, his voice cold and commanding. "Aeros is now secure. The price of our sovereignty is paid in the blood of martyrs who died serving the state's security. From this day forward, the Charter of the Wilds is absolute. No personal loyalty, no former bond, and no outside principle can supersede the needs of this state." In this moment, Elias truly became the architect. He sacrificed the human element, the lives of the couriers, to perfect the structural integrity of the state. He proved that his character was a tool to be forged, hardened, and used without sentimentality. The new horizon. With the threat of European discovery averted, Elias turned his focus entirely inward. The state was secure, but it was not yet sustainable. He needed resources that could not be acquired through secret trade, namely, skilled labor and materials for permanent construction. The time for secrecy was nearly over. To grow, Aeros would need a controlled, limited expansion. Elias devised a radical plan to draw new, highly specialized settlers into his isolated valley, people who had no ties to Europe, people who were already lost or isolated on the frontier. But how to find them without revealing Aeros? He planned. Chapter 4. The Whisper Network. The silence that followed the ambush of the couriers confirmed Elias Carson's success. The state of Aeros was physically secure. He had eliminated the last external threat, but the security was brittle. Elias, the architect, knew that his philosophical project was doomed to collapse without specialized talent. The 47 remaining settlers were pioneers, but they lacked the specific skills: a true blacksmith, an advanced medic, a master machinist needed for permanent self-sufficiency. Aeros required new citizens, but the rule remained absolute. The location of the settlement could never be revealed. Elias gathered his surviving inner council to present his final blueprint for expansion. "We will not send recruiters to the frontier, for they will be followed," Elias explained, tracing lines on his rough-hewn map. "Instead, we will create a lure, a carefully managed legend." His plan was to craft a subtle, fictional narrative, a rumor spread only in the deepest corners of frontier society. This would be the Whisper Network. The story they would disseminate was simple, designed to appeal to the most desperate and valuable segments of the frontier. Somewhere deep in the Appalachians, there exists a community known only as the Last Haven, a place of absolute order and anonymity, offering endless opportunity for those with specialized skills, provided they bring no past and ask no questions. The rumor also included a complex initiation ritual, ensuring only the most dedicated found the first step. The hopeful recruit had to travel alone to a specific, remote, oddly shaped boulder near a river fork and leave a carefully carved wooden symbol signifying their trade: a hammer, a snake, a gear. If the symbol vanished within 3 days, they were deemed worthy. This filters out casual opportunists. We attract the truly broken, the brilliant, and the desperately private. Their loyalty to their past is already severed, making their loyalty to Aeros absolute. The human firewall. The next challenge was transport. How to guide the chosen few to Aeros without leaving a traceable path. Elias's solution was the anchor, a human firewall designed to forget. He selected a loyal, unmarried man named Silas. Silas knew the trail from Aeros, but possessed a poor internal sense of direction to it. His role was to retrieve the candidates from the boulder, blindfold them, and lead them on a confusing, circuitous trek designed specifically to disorient. The final ruthless step was the immediate severance of the link. Once the new citizens arrived, Silas, the anchor, would be permanently blindfolded again, given his gold, and sent to live out his days in a distant coastal town, barred by threat of death and his own confusion from ever finding his way back. The cost of secrecy demanded the permanent dislocation of a trusted citizen. The first catch. Elias assigned Hiram, a retired solitary peddler, as the keeper of the network. Hiram's task was to live anonymously near the furthest settlements, carefully injecting the rumor of the Last Haven into conversations with the right targets: the skilled, the isolated, the genius who needed to disappear. Months later, the news arrived. Hiram had succeeded. At the designated boulder, Silas found 2 symbols: a caduceus, the medical symbol, and a complex gear assembly. He had 2 candidates. Silas followed his protocol perfectly. He retrieved Dr. Ilara Vance, a self-taught apothecary and surgeon who had fled accusations of witchcraft for her advanced practices, and Gustav, a hulking German immigrant and master machinist hiding from severe debt. Under the cover of night, he bound their eyes, and the arduous, bewildering journey began. When they finally arrived at the concealed entrance of Aeros, they were terrified but present. Elias Carson, now fully the architect, welcomed them with a practiced, powerful authority. "Welcome to Aeros. You are here because you are necessary. Your past is irrelevant. Your future is service." Before their arrival could destabilize the small state, Elias ensured that Silas, the anchor, was immediately blindfolded again, given his gold, and sent on a lonely southbound path far away from the valley. The system was now operational, but the new citizens, skilled, morally complex, and fiercely independent, brought with them a new form of internal challenge.
Chapter 5. The Corrosion of Principle. The arrival of the new citizens, Dr. Ilara Vance and Gustav the machinist, brought an immediate, palpable shift to Aeros. Their skills were invaluable. Gustav's forge now roared with purpose, and Ilara's apothecary shop, though crude, became the heart of health. But they carried with them the very complexity Elias had sought to eliminate: personal ambition, deep-seated trauma, and a subtle but powerful resistance to absolute authority. Elias Carson, the architect, realized he had built the walls of his state strong, but the spirit of his citizens was now introducing a slow, corrosive poison into his philosophical foundation. The problem of specialization. Ilara and Gustav quickly understood their worth. They knew they were irreplaceable. This awareness granted them a subtle power that the original, highly compliant settlers, most of whom were academics and laborers, lacked. Ilara, with her medical knowledge, challenged the strict duty-based structure of the Charter of the Wilds. When a settler collapsed from exhaustion while working in the fields, a direct violation of the primacy of labor pillar, Elias insisted on a public reprimand to maintain discipline. Ilara intervened, facing Elias in his council room. "Mr. Carson," she said, her voice sharp and steady, "you can reprimand him, but you cannot replace him. He is suffering from nutrient deficiencies combined with overexertion. If you push discipline over longevity, your state will be structurally unsound. A living being cannot be governed like a clockwork mechanism." Her argument was purely practical, rooted in the survival of the state, not in abstract philosophy. Elias, whose decisions had always been based on the philosophy of survival, was momentarily stunned. He was forced to concede, allowing Ilara to institute a mandatory rest rotation. The charter was not broken, but it had been flexed, a dangerous precedent. Gustav, the machinist, posed a different problem. He required large amounts of coal and raw iron, resources that were difficult to procure without more external trade runs. Elias had intended to limit the blind path trades to once a season, minimizing exposure. "You want a great state, architect? A great state needs great tools. Your walls are strong, but your economy is weak. You need regular trade, or my forge becomes a shrine to good intentions. You fear exposure, but I fear stagnation." Elias realized his first mistake. His philosophy prioritized secrecy over progress. To achieve the architect's goal of stability, he had to accept a greater degree of calculated risk. Thomas's decline and the rise of the pragmatists. The new tensions widened the chasm between the original settlers. Thomas, the chronicler, was horrified by the pragmatism of Ilara and Gustav. He saw them as agents of the same European self-interest Elias had fled. "They erode the moral fabric," Thomas cried to Elias one evening. "We started with a pure foundation, and now you let necessity dictate our principles." Elias dismissed his former student with a weary wave. "Necessity is the highest principle, Thomas.
The state is a tool, not a prayer. It must adapt to the conditions or perish. Your role is to write the glorious history of Aeros, not to judge its messy construction. Thomas began drinking heavily, his journals turning from grand philosophical accounts to bitter personal critiques of Elias's descent into tyranny. Meanwhile, the Warden Corps, led by the pragmatic quartermaster, quietly gained influence. They supported Ilara's and Gustav's demands because those demands made their job, maintaining order and security, easier. Elias realized he was governing a state that was evolving beyond his initial blueprint, powered by the necessary evils he had imported. The first test of internal power. The greatest challenge arrived when Gustav, frustrated by a delay in a critical metal shipment, bypassed the Warden Corps' established inventory system and began hoarding scrap metal in his forge. He argued that the materials were essential for his work and could not be subject to the community's slow bureaucratic process. This was an open challenge to the architect's centralized authority. If Gustav succeeded, every specialist could claim autonomy, and the discipline of Aeros would crumble. Elias had executed the couriers for maintaining secrecy. He could not afford to allow a threat to internal order. He confronted Gustav not with punishment, but with a different kind of architectural maneuvering. Elias did not seize the hoard. Instead, he ordered a public audit of Gustav's labor hours and production schedule. He exposed that Gustav's hoarding, while practical, had been done during communal work hours, thus violating the primacy of labor, the one rule every settler, high or low, had accepted. Gustav, the pragmatic machinist, had been outmaneuvered by Elias, the strategic theorist. Elias reinstated the seized materials, but placed them under the joint management of Ilara, who understood the necessity of the tools, and the quartermaster, who maintained the discipline. By forcing the two specialists to collaborate, Elias diffused the internal threat and solidified the ultimate authority of the state. But the lesson was clear. His state would no longer be governed by simple idealistic decrees. It would be governed by a complex, dangerous equilibrium, a woven net of power where the ruler had to be as adaptable as a physician and as ruthless as a machine.